Hi everybody, I'm Esther. In this video, I will introduce the past tense. We'll talk about the past simple, past continuous, past perfect, and past perfect continuous tense. There's a lot to study and a lot to practice, so let's get started. Hi everyone. In this video, I will introduce the past simple English tense. This grammar tense can help you explain a past general state, action, or habit. There's a lot to learn and it's a very important tense, so keep watching. In this video, I will talk about the be verb in the past simple tense. The be verb in the past simple tense can be used to describe a past general state. We use the be verbs was and were in this tense. Take a look at the examples. I was scared. James or he was a teacher. She was sad. My dog was hungry. My dog can be it. So for I, he, she, it, we use the past tense be verb was. However, for you, we, and they, we use were. You were a good student. Your parents, or they, were at the park. And we were at home for 2 hours. In this last sentence, you see that the duration is emphasized. Great job! Let's move on. Now, I will talk about regular verbs in the past simple tense. Take a look at these examples. Liam played a game. Liam is a he, but really it doesn't matter for regular verbs in the past simple tense because no matter what the subject is, all we have to do is add d or ed to the end of the verb. Here, the verb is play, so I added ed. Liam played a game. The car, or it, needed gas. The verb here is need. For the past simple tense, I added ed. We watched a movie. Again, an ed at the end of watch. You exercised for an hour. In this case, the verb is exercise. I only need to add a d to make it the past tense. And finally, they usually worked after school. The verb is work, and I added an ed to make it in the past tense. The word usually shows that this was a habit. Remember, the past simple tense can be used to show past habits. Let's move on. Now, I'll talk about irregular verbs in the past simple tense. Remember, for regular verbs, we only add d or ed to make a verb into the past tense. However, for irregular verbs, we have to change the verb in a different way. Let's take a look at some examples. I ate with my friend. The verb here is ate. Ate is the past simple tense of eat. The next example says Nara wrote a story. The verb is write. And because it's irregular, to change it into the past tense, we change the verb to wrote. You often came home late. The verb here is come, and it's been changed to came. You'll notice that we had the word often to show a habit. We bought a camera. The verb here is buy, and it's been changed to bought to show the past simple tense. And finally, my parents sent me money for a year. Here, the verb sent is the past tense of send. Here, we also see for a year. This shows duration. Let's move on. Now, I will talk about the negative form for the be verb in the past simple tense. Here are some examples. The first one says, I was not hungry. For the past simple tense, the negative be verb, if the subject is I, he, she, or it, we say was not. For example, I was not. Or she was not, or the contraction wasn't. I wasn't. She wasn't. So let's look again. I was not hungry. She wasn't home today. Now, if the subject is you, we, or they, we say were not, or the contraction weren't. The children, or they, were not quiet. The children were not quiet. And then the dog, or it, was not, or wasn't, playful. Let's move on. Now, let's talk about how to form the negative in the past simple tense for non-be verbs, regular or irregular. Here are some examples. I did not like him. What we do for non-be verbs is simply put did not after the subject. And you'll notice that for the verb, we don't make any changes. We keep the base verb. He didn't catch the ball. Again, it's he did not, but here we used a contraction. He didn't catch the ball. They didn't dance. Again, here's the contraction for did not. And you'll notice that for the verb, we didn't change it at all. Here's an irregular verb and here's a regular verb. We keep them in the base form. And finally, we didn't think about that. Again, we simply say did not or didn't. Let's move on. Now, I will introduce two ways to form questions for the past simple tense. Take a look at the first example. He was angry. In this first sentence, we see the be verb was. It's quite easy. All you have to do to turn this into a question is switch the order of the first two words. Was he angry? You can answer by saying yes, he was, or no, he wasn't. The next sentence also has a be verb. They were comfortable. So again, switch the first two words. Were they comfortable? The answers can be yes, they were, or no, they weren't. However, look at the third sentence. Sam lived here. There is no be verb in this sentence. Instead, we see the action verb lived. So what we do is, no matter what the subject, we start the question with did. Did Sam live here? You'll notice that the verb no longer is in the past tense. We use the base form of the verb. Did Sam live here? You can say yes, he did, or no, he didn't. The last sentence is similar. They won the contest last year. The verb here is won. That's not a be verb. So again, we start the question with did. And then the subject, they. We use the base form of the verb, and that's win. Did they win the contest last year? You can say yes, they did, or no, they didn't. Let's move on. Now, I'll introduce how to create and answer WH questions in the past simple tense. Take a look at the board. We have some WH words here. What, when, where, and why. You'll notice that after each WH word comes the word did. What did? When did? Where did? And why did? What comes after that? The subject, and then the base form of the verb. So, let's take a look. What did you do last night? What did you do last night? I can answer by saying something like, I watched a movie, or I read a book. You'll notice that the answer is in the past simple tense. When did you get home last night? I got home at 10 p.m. Where did they eat lunch? They ate lunch at home. Again, ate is the past tense of eat. Answer in the past simple tense. And finally, why did the company hire him? The company hired him because he's a hard worker. Let's move on. In this first checkup, we'll take a look at practice questions using the be verb in the past simple tense. Remember, the be verbs in the past simple tense are was or were. Let's take a look at the first sentence. He blank at work earlier. The subject here is we. So, do we use was or were? The correct answer is was. He was at work earlier. The next sentence says, we blank very happy yesterday. If the subject is we, remember the be verb is were. We were very happy yesterday. Next, my parents or they blank worried about me. If it's they, remember we have to say were. My parents were worried about me. If I want to use the negative, I can also say my parents weren't worried about me. And that's possible. Now, I want you to find the mistake in the next sentence. We wasn't good students. We wasn't good students. Can you figure out what's wrong? The subject here is we, so we don't say was not. We need to say were not, or the contraction weren't. We weren't good students is the correct answer. The next one says, were she a teacher? Now this is a question, so the be verb comes at the beginning. That's correct. But the subject here is she. Therefore, we need to start with was. Was she a teacher? And finally, they wasn't at school. The subject is they. So the answer is they weren't at school. You can use the contraction weren't or were not. Let's move on to the next checkup. Now, let's practice regular verbs in the past simple tense. Take a look at the first sentence. He blank at home. The verb is study. Remember, when changing a regular verb into the past tense, we add d or ed to the end of the verb. However, there's a separate rule for words that end in y, such as study. We drop the y and we add ied. So the correct answer is he studied at home. The next sentence says, we blank pencils. We want to use the negative because it says not use. Remember, for the negative, we always use did not, no matter what the subject. You can also use the contraction didn't. Now, what do we do to the verb? We keep it as is. We do not change it. We didn't or we did not use pencils. The next sentence says, his friends or they walk to the gym. What's the past tense of walk? We simply have to add ed because it's a regular verb. His friends walked to the gym. Now, find the mistake in the next sentence. She didn't likes math. Didn't is correct. However, remember, we keep the verb as is in the base form. So, we don't say likes, we say like. She didn't like math. The next sentence says, did it rain this morning? Now this is a question. In a question, it's right to start the sentence with did. Did it rain? Do you notice the mistake? Remember, we do not use the past tense form in the question. We use the base form of the verb. Did it rain this morning? And finally, they not play the piano. The verb is an action verb, so we need a did in front of the not. They did not play the piano. Let's move on to the next checkup. Now, I'll talk about irregular verbs in the past simple tense. Take a look at the first sentence. He blank to school, and the verb is run. Run is an irregular verb, so the past tense form is ran. He ran to school. The next sentence says, we blink flowers. We want to use the negative because here it says not grow. Remember, no matter what the subject, in the negative form, we say did not or didn't. Then we keep the verb in its base form. We did not grow or we didn't grow flowers. The next sentence says, where blank you teach last year. This is a question. Again, all we need to put is did. Where did you teach last year? It doesn't matter what the subject is. We always go with did. Next, try to find the mistake in the next sentence. He didn't sold newspapers. Remember, in the negative, didn't is correct for whatever subject there is. However, we need to keep the verb in its base form. So, the correct answer is he didn't sell newspapers. The next sentence says, did she sing a song? You'll notice it's a similar problem here. Sang is the irregular past tense form of sing. But in a question, if it starts with did, we use the base form. Did she sing a song? And finally, we taked it home. Does that sound right? Taked is not correct. The past tense of taked is took. We took it home. Great job, everyone. Let's move on. Wow, we learned a lot in this video. Keep studying and reviewing the past simple tense. It's an essential tense that will help you talk about the past. Keep studying English, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Hi everybody, I'm Esther. In this video, I will introduce the past continuous tense. This tense can be used to describe an action that was ongoing in the past. It can also be used to describe two actions happening at the same time in the past. There's a lot to learn, so let's get started. Let's take a look at the first usage of the past continuous tense. This tense can be used to describe an action that was ongoing in the past. Let's take a look at these examples. I was walking in the park in the evening. So first, we start with the subject, I. For I, he, she, and it, we follow with was. I was. And then we add an ing to the end of the verb. I was walking. Now take a look at the whole sentence. I was walking in the park in the evening. You can see that this was an ongoing action and it happened in the past. Let's look at the next example. She was living here last year. Here, the subject is she, so again, we use was and then verb ing. Here, we have another expression that shows that this action was happening in the past. The dog, or it, was eating dinner 5 minutes ago. The subject here is the dog, which can be replaced by the pronoun it, and so we follow with was. And finally, Andy and Jim, we can replace this with they. For you, we, and they, we use were. They were, or Andy and Jim were, working at 9 p.m. Let's move on. The past continuous tense is also used to describe an ongoing action in the past that was interrupted by another action. This interrupting action is used in the past simple tense with the word when. Let's take a look at this example. I was playing cards when you called. Again, we start with the subject, was or were, and then verb ing. So this is the action that was ongoing in the past. I was playing cards. The interrupting action in this sentence is you called. You'll notice I used the word when to show the interrupting action, and I used it in the past simple tense, called. Let's take a look at the next sentence. The cat, or it, was eating when Eric came home. Again, the action in progress is the cat was eating. And Eric came home. You'll notice the past simple tense. This is the interrupting action used with the word when. We were sleeping when Anne arrived. Again, we have the ongoing action in the past. The subject here is we, and so we used were. And then verb ing. When Anne arrived is the interrupting action. And finally, Alicia and I, or we, were walking when we saw Mark. When we saw Mark is the interrupting action that interrupted the ongoing Alicia and I were walking. It's also important to note that we can also switch the order of the sentence around and say, when you called, I was playing cards. Or when Eric came home, the cat was eating. Let's move on. Another usage for the past continuous tense is to talk about two actions that were happening at the same time in the past. We use the past continuous tense for both actions with the word while. Let's take a look at some examples. The first sentence says, while I was playing soccer, she was watching me. You'll notice that both actions are in the past continuous tense. I was playing soccer and she was watching me. The word while at the beginning shows that these actions were happening at the same time. While you were reading, I was preparing dinner. Again, both actions are expressed in the past continuous tense. The word while shows that they were happening at the same time. While her husband, or he, was driving, she was taking pictures. Both actions are in the past continuous tense. And finally, while we were eating, the music was playing. Both actions were happening at the same time. Now, you'll notice that in my examples, the word while comes at the beginning. However, it's important to note that you can move the word while around in several ways. For example, instead of saying this, while I was playing soccer, she was watching me, I can move while to the middle of the sentence. I was playing soccer while she was watching me. I can put the while between the two actions. Or I can also change the sentence around and say, while she was watching me, I was playing soccer. So it doesn't matter which action comes first with the while if you put it in the beginning. Let's move on. Now, let's talk about the negative form of the past continuous tense. Here are some examples. She was not reading last night. The subject is she, and so we use was. However, before the verb ing, we add not. She was not reading last night. I can use a contraction and say she wasn't reading last night. We were not listening to music this morning. In this case, the subject is we, and so we use were. Again, not comes before the verb ing. We were not listening to music this morning. Again, I can use a contraction and say we weren't listening to music this morning. And the next one says he wasn't watching TV when his dad came home. In this example, the contraction is already there for you. He wasn't watching TV. You'll notice the word when. Remember, when plus a past simple tense verb shows an interrupting action. So, when his dad came home, he wasn't watching TV. He was doing something else. And finally, they weren't talking while the game was playing. The word while is in this sentence. Remember, that shows two past ongoing actions happening at the same time. So while the game was playing, they weren't talking. They were doing something else. Let's move on. Now, let's talk about how to form be verb questions for the past continuous tense. Take a look at the first statement. It says, "It was raining this morning." In order to turn this into a question, it's quite easy. All we have to do is change the order of the first two words. Instead of "it was," I now say "was it" to make it a question. You'll notice that the rest of the words stay in the same place. Was it raining this morning? You can answer by saying yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. The next statement says, "They were living there when the fire happened." To turn this into a be question, again, we just switch the order of the first two words. Instead of "they were," we say "were they?" And again, the rest of the words can stay in the same place. Were they living there when the fire happened? And you can answer by saying yes, they were, or no, they weren't. Let's continue on. Now, I'll go into how to make WH questions for the past continuous tense. You'll notice that the examples here all begin with some WH words. For example, what, where, why, and who. Let's take a look at the first question. What were they doing last night? The subject of this sentence is they. So what you do is, after the WH word, you put the proper be verb. In this case, were. What were they doing last night? You'll notice that after the subject comes the verb ing. What were they doing last night? I can answer by saying they were playing games or they were reading a book. The next question says, where was he working last week? In this case, the subject is he, and so the be verb to use is was. Where was he working last week? I can say he was working in Canada. Why was she crying when she finished the book? In this case, the subject is she, and so I put was after why. Why was she crying when she finished the book? I can say she was crying because the ending was sad. And finally, who were the children staying with while their mom was working? In this case, the children is a they, so we follow who with were. Who were they, or who were the children staying with while their mom was working? To answer, I can say the children or they were staying with their dad. Let's move on. In this section, let's do a checkup for the past continuous tense. Take a look at the first sentence. Last night, they were blank at school. I want you to try to fill in the blank with a negative for the verb stay, not stay. What do you think it is? Remember, for the negative of the past continuous, all you have to do is put not and then verb ing after the be verb. They were not staying at school. Last night, they were not staying at school. The next sentence says, 2 days ago, you blank soccer. Again, try the negative for the verb play. 2 days ago, blank, not play soccer. In this case, the first thing that's missing is the be verb. If the subject is you, can you think of which be verb needs to be put in there? The correct answer is were. And then we say not. What happens after that? Remember, verb ing. So, you were not playing. 2 days ago, you were not playing soccer. You can also use a contraction and say you weren't playing soccer. Now, try to find the mistake in the next sentence. Yesterday, she were reading at home. The subject of this sentence is she. So the be verb to use is not were, it's was. Yesterday, she was reading at home. In the next sentence, it says tomorrow, they were seeing their friends. They and were, that's correct. And we have the verb ing. So what's the mistake? Remember, the past continuous is for the past. Tomorrow is not the past. So instead, we need to put a word that shows the past. For example, I can say yesterday. Yesterday, they were seeing their friends. Let's move on. Now, let's start a checkup of the when usage of the past continuous tense. Take a look at the first example. It says Andrea and John blink when they blink hurt. Remember, when shows an interrupting action. It needs to be used with the past simple tense. So let's first look at the second blink, when they blink hurt. What's the past tense of the verb get? The answer is got. Now, let's take a look at the action that was in progress in the past. Andrea and John, or they, well, what comes after they? Were. Andrea and John were. Then remember we need to add ing to the verb. They were skiing, or Andrea and John were skiing when they got hurt. The next example says, it blink not raining when the game blink. And I want you to use the verb start for the second blink. Take a look. When the game blink. What's the past tense of start? Started. Now, let's look at the first part of the sentence. The subject is it. So, what be verb do we use for it? Was. It was not raining when the game started. Now, find the mistake in the next sentence. I wasn't studying at the library yesterday. The subject here is I, and so the be verb was is correct. Here, there's a contraction, I wasn't, for I was not. Now, the problem is with the verb. Remember, we need to put ing at the end of the verb. I wasn't studying at the library yesterday. And finally, we did meet our friends last weekend. That sounds right, but remember, we're doing the past continuous tense. Take a look again. The subject is we. We need a be verb. Were. Then what happens? Remember, we need to add an ing to the end of the verb. So we take out did and say, we were meeting our friends last weekend. Let's move on. Now, for this checkup, we'll look at the while usage of the past continuous tense. Take a look at the first example. While I blink, someone blink my bike. When we use while in the past continuous tense, we're showing that two actions happened at the same time in the past, or they were happening at the same time in the past. So, we need to use the past continuous for both actions. While I blink, I want you to use shop in the first blink. Remember, the subject here is I, so I need to use the be verb was. Then, verb ing. While I was shopping, now someone can be a he or she. Therefore, again, we need to use was. And then the verb ing of steal. While I was shopping, someone was stealing my bike. The next sentence says, while he blink, I want you to use the verb cook. The subject is he, and so I need to use was cooking. While he was cooking, his girlfriend was cleaning. Did you get that? Let's move on. Try to find the mistake in the next sentence. Jane was looking for us while we get off the plane. The first part of this sentence is correct. Jane was looking. Now, the second part of the sentence, notice it's not in the past continuous tense, while we get off the plane. So, what we need to do is say, were getting. Jane was looking for us while we were getting off the plane. The next sentence says, I was watching TV while my wife sleep. Again, this part of the sentence did not use the past continuous tense. My wife is a she, and so I need to say was sleeping. I was watching TV while my wife was sleeping. Great job, everyone. Let's move on. Good job, everybody, in learning the past continuous tense. This tense can be a little difficult and a little tricky, especially when it comes to the when and while usage. It'll take some practice to really master it, but I know you can do it. Keep studying English, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi everybody, I'm Esther. In this video, I will introduce the past perfect tense. This tense is used to describe an action that took place at a specific time in the past. This tense can be a little tricky, but don't worry, I will guide you through it. There's so much to learn and it's a very important tense, so keep watching. Let's take a look at the first usage of the past perfect tense. This tense can be used to describe an action in the past that happened before another action in the past. Here are some examples. I had visited China before I moved there. No matter what the subject, you follow with had, so that's easy. I had, Steve had, the plane had, and we had. Then we follow with the past participle of the verb. In this case, it's visited. I had visited China. Now you'll notice that the second verb is in the past simple tense. I moved there. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Steve had bought the book. Again, subject, had, and past participle. In this case, the verb is buy. Steve had bought the book before he read it. Again, we have the simple tense of read, which is read. And finally, the plane had left by the time I got to the airport. Again, the first part of this sentence is in the past perfect tense. The plane had left. This is the past participle of leave. The second verb says I got to the airport. Got is the past tense of get. Now, what these three sentences have in common is that you'll see before or by the time. They all mean the same thing. The verb that is in the past perfect tense happened first. The verb that's in the past simple tense happened after. So again, for the first example, before I moved there, that happened later. Before that, I had already visited China. Do you understand how that works? Let's take a look at the last example. When they arrived, we had already started the game. So maybe they were late or something had happened. But when they arrived, this is the past simple tense. So this happened second. We had already started the game. This action had already started. It started before this action. Let's move on. Earlier, I mentioned that the past perfect tense can be used to describe an action that happened in the past before another action in the past. We can do the same thing, but also emphasize the duration, how long that first action happened. We do this by using for and a duration. Let's take a look. I had owned my computer for 2 months before it broke. This is very similar to the first usage. I, had, and the past participle of the verb. This part shows the action that happened earlier in the past. The second part, it broke. The past simple tense verb shows the action in the past that happened later than the first action. However, you'll notice that this sentence has a duration for 2 months. I had owned my computer for 2 months before it broke. All I'm doing here is showing how long the first action had been true. Let's take a look at the next example. Jim had been lonely for a long time until he got a puppy. Again, we have subject, had, past participle. And then we have the past simple. He got a puppy. All we're doing here is emphasizing how long the first action had been true. He had been lonely for a long time. That is until the later action. He got a puppy. And finally, she and I had been friends for many years before she became my wife. The first part of the sentence is the past perfect. It happened before she became my wife. But I want to explain how long that had been true. For many years. Let's move on. Now, I'll introduce how to form the negative in the past perfect tense. Take a look at the board. The first sentence says, I had not eaten at the restaurant before I went yesterday. Again, we have the past perfect tense here and the past simple tense here. This one is the action that happened earlier in the past, and this one over here is the action that happened later in the past. However, because this is the negative, what I'm going to do is add a not between the had and the past participle of the verb. So I say, I had not eaten, or I can use the contraction and say, I hadn't eaten at the restaurant before I went yesterday. The next sentence is very similar. She had not been to the circus before she went last week. Here's the action that happened earlier in the past, and here's the action that happened later in the past. However, again, because it's negative, I put a not between had and the past participle of the verb. Also, I can use the contraction and say she hadn't been to the circus. The next sentence says, the cat hadn't chased the bird for very long before it flew away. Remember, we can show duration or how long the first action was true by using for and a duration. Because this is the negative form, again, I use had not after the subject and before the past participle of the verb. In this case, the contraction hadn't is already there for you. We hadn't known each other for 3 months before we married. That's a pretty short time. It shows the duration by saying for, how long? 3 months. Let's move on. Now, let's take a look at questions using had in the past perfect tense. Take a look at the first sentence. It says, she had eaten lunch by noon. Now, to turn this into a question, it's quite easy. All you have to do is change the order of the first 2 words. So instead of she had, we say had she. Had she eaten lunch by noon? You can say yes, she had, or no, she hadn't. The next sentence says, it had rained before they left. Again, simply switch the order of the first 2 words. Instead of it had, say had it to make a question. Had it rained before they left? To reply, you can say yes, it had, or no, it hadn't. Let's move on. Now, I'll go into how to form WH questions in the past perfect tense. Let's take a look. Here, we see at the beginning of each question a WH word. Where, who, what, and how. Let's take a look at the first question. Where had he traveled before? You'll notice that after each WH word, we have had. And then the subject, and then the past participle of the verb. Where had he traveled before? The next question says, who had she talked to before? This is the same thing. The WH word, had she, and then the past participle. You'll notice here that we have the word before, but we didn't write a specific point in time. If you see that, it simply means before now. The next question says, what had he eaten before lunch? Again, we follow the same formula. However, here it says lunch for you. The last one says, how long had she known him before she dated him? Again, how long, had, subject, and then the past participle. Let's take a look at how to answer these questions. Where had he traveled before? He had traveled to Europe is one possible answer. Who had she talked to before? Here, I can say she had talked to her brother. What had he eaten before lunch? He had eaten sushi before lunch. And finally, how long had she known him before she dated him? She had known him for 3 years. That is one possible answer. Let's move on. Now, let's take a look at some practice exercises for the basic usage of the past perfect tense. Take a look at the first sentence. I blank for 6 hours before I had a break. The verb here is work. Remember, we need to say I had no matter what the subject is. Say had. I had, and then you take the past participle of the verb. In this case, we would say worked. I had worked for 6 hours before I had a break. For the next sentence, I want you to try the negative form. We blank TV before we listened to the radio. Remember, for the negative form, we say had not, or we use the contraction hadn't. We hadn't, and then we need the past participle. We hadn't watched TV before we listened to the radio. Now, find the mistake in the next sentence. Reggie hadn't been to Mexico before he went to Peru. Well, we have the subject here, and for the negative, hadn't is correct. However, we need the past participle of the verb be. So the correct answer is, Reggie hadn't been to Mexico before he went to Peru. And finally, Sally and Jan, or they, had do their job. Remember, we need the past participle. We don't say do, we say done. Sally and Jan had done their job before they watched TV. Let's move on. In this checkup, we'll take a look at some practice exercises for the past perfect tense that describes how long. Let's take a look at the first sentence. You blank at the park for 3 hours before you came home. Remember, we start with the subject and then had. So I'm going to add that here. Then we need the past participle of the verb be, and that is been. You had been at the park for 3 hours before you came home. The next sentence says, they blank for 6 hours before they took a break. Again, no matter what the subject, we have had and then the past participle. So the answer is, they had studied for 6 hours before they took a break. Now, find the mistake in the next sentence. It's a little bit longer, so it might take you a while. They had been known each other for 10 years before they had their first fight. Can you find the mistake? Well, we have the subject and had, but check this out. There are two past participles here. We need to get rid of one of them. We can take out this verb and say they had known each other for 10 years before they had their first fight. The next sentence says, I have played soccer for many years before I scored my first goal. This sentence doesn't look wrong at first, but remember in the past perfect tense, we need to say had. I had played soccer for many years before I scored my first goal. Good job, everybody. Let's move on. Great job, everyone. Now you have a better understanding of the past perfect tense. I know it can be a little difficult, but keep studying and keep practicing and you will get better. I know studying English is not easy, but with time and effort, I know you'll master it. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Hi everybody, I'm Esther. In this video, I will introduce the past perfect continuous tense. It's a great tense that helps you express an ongoing action in the past, continuing up to another point in the past. There's a lot to learn, so keep watching. One usage of the past perfect continuous tense is to talk about an ongoing action in the past that continued up to another point in the past. You can use for and a duration to talk about how long that action was in progress. Here are some examples. I had been waiting for the bus for 2 hours before it arrived. You'll notice that at the beginning, it doesn't matter what the subject is, we follow with had been. For example, I had been, Chuck had been, and Tom and Kim had been. And then we follow with the verb ing, waiting. I had been waiting. Now this is the ongoing action that happened first. Again, 4 and 2 hours shows the duration. The second part says it arrived. This verb is in the past simple tense. Therefore, that is the second action. It's the action that this first action happened until this action happened. So again, I had been waiting for the bus happened first, and then it happened until the bus arrived. Chuck had been cooking. Again, that part's easy. No matter what the subject, we say had been and then verb ing. Again, I can show how long Chuck had been cooking by saying for an hour, showing the duration. And then I finish by saying before he finished. He had been cooking up to this point in the past. Finally, Tom and Kim had been walking. This part should be familiar to you by now. For an hour. Again, that shows duration before they rested. So they had been walking for an hour before they took a break, before they rested. Let's move on. The past perfect continuous tense is also used to express cause and effect in the past. The verb that's in the past perfect continuous tense shows the cause, why something happened. We can use because or so to show the cause and effect. Here, I'll explain. Jason was tired because he had been jogging. The first part of the sentence is in the past tense. Jason was tired. However, we see why. Well, because he had been jogging. The second part of this sentence is in the past perfect continuous tense. He had been, remember, no matter what the subject, we follow with had been, and jogging, verb ing. He had been jogging. This shows why Jason was tired. The next sentence says the pavement, or it, was wet because it had been raining. Similar to the first sentence, it had been raining shows the cause. Why was the pavement wet? The pavement was wet because it had been raining. In this sentence, we see a little difference. The children had been playing. Again, this is the past perfect continuous tense. Had been playing. The second part says the room was a mess. So here, instead of because, like the first two sentences, I used so. So the order has been changed, but the meaning is the same. This, the children had been playing, is why the room was a mess. This is the cause, and this is the effect. Let's move on. Now, let's go into the negative form of the past perfect continuous tense. Here are some examples. I had not been working for a day before I quit. So, no matter what the subject, I, you, she, or it, just like in the affirmative, we say had. But after the had, in the negative form, we add not. Had not, had not. Or you can use the contraction hadn't, which is a combination of had and not together. I had not been working. The rest of the sentence is the same. Been, verb, ing. I had not been working for a day before I quit. The next sentence says, you had not been cutting onions for long before you cried. Again, the not goes between had and been. She hadn't been studying for long when she fell asleep. Here we have the contraction. And finally, it hadn't been snowing for long when it stopped. Again, we have the contraction for had not here. You'll notice that in the first two sentences, I used before, and in the last two, I used when. Either one can be used to show when the first action stopped. Let's move on. Now, let's go into how to form basic questions in the past perfect continuous tense. Here is the first example. He had been driving all day before he arrived. Now, to turn this into a question, all we have to do is change the order of the first two words. Instead of he had, now I can say had he in order to form a question. Had he been driving all day before he arrived? The next sentence says the dog had been barking because it was scared. In this case, the subject is the dog. And then we follow with had. To turn this into a question, again, we switch the order. Had the dog been barking because it was scared? You'll notice that in the question, the rest of the words stay in the same place. Now, in the first question, we're asking how long an action happened or how long it was ongoing in the past. And in this question, we ask about cause and effect. Let's move on. Now, I'll introduce how to form WH questions in the past perfect continuous tense. Take a look at these examples. You'll notice that they all start with the WH word. Why, where, what, and who. You might also have noticed that after we have had. Why had, where had, what had, and who had. In the first question, after that comes the subject. Why had you? And then been, verb, ing. And that's the same pattern we follow for all of these sentences. So, why had you been studying so much? I can answer by saying, I had been studying so much because I have a test. Where had you been traveling before you came here? I can say, I had been traveling through Asia. What had they been playing before they played soccer? I can answer, they had been playing baseball. And finally, who had she been talking to before she left home? I can answer, she had been talking to her boyfriend. Let's move on. Let's start a checkup for the past perfect continuous tense. Take a look at the first sentence. It says, They blank for a long time before they went home. Try to fill in the blank with the verb work in this tense. Remember, no matter what the subject, we follow the subject with had been. So we say, they had been. What happens to the verb? Remember, we add ing. So the sentence is, they had been working for a long time before they went home. Now, take a look at the second sentence. I want you to use the negative. I blink TV for a year before I started again. Remember, the negative form for this tense starts with the subject and then had not been. Or I can use the contraction hadn't. I hadn't been, and then again, verb ing. I hadn't been watching TV for a year before I started again. Now, try to find the mistake in this next sentence. Gina and I hadn't been due any work before we started. What's the error? You'll notice that the verb does not have an ing. To make this sentence correct, we must say, Gina and I hadn't been doing any work before we started. Now, find the mistake here. He had been watching YouTube because he had some free time. He had, that's correct, but we need to change be to been. And watching is correct. So, he had been watching YouTube because he had some free time. Let's move on. Now, let's move on to another checkup of the past perfect continuous tense. Take a look at the first example. It says the company blank employees because they worked hard. Use the verb promote in the past perfect continuous tense. Remember, no matter what the subject, we follow with had been. So we say the company had been and then verb ing. So promoting. The company had been promoting employees because they worked hard. The next example says, I blank your emails for a while because they went to the spam folder. Here, try to use the negative form with the verb get. Remember, in the negative form, we say had not been getting, or the contraction hadn't been getting. I hadn't been getting your emails for a while because they went to the spam folder. Now, look for the mistake in the next sentence. I had been work a lot because I needed the money. What's the mistake? Remember, we need to add ing to the verb. I had been working a lot because I needed the money. The last sentence says, he has been smoking because he was stressed. Can you find the mistake? Remember, we're practicing the past perfect continuous. In this case, we need had after the subject, not has. Great job, everyone. Let's move on. Thank you so much for watching this grammar course on the past tense. Now, if you haven't had a chance to check out my grammar course on the present tense or the future tense, make sure you do that now. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!